Maybe it was escort vehicle driver.
Okay, of
Try that one because I've been getting that one a lot too.
course. Um, escort vehicle is a light truck driver. You can either trust me or we can look it up. Anybody have any doubt that it's light truck drivers is the right one? If they are using a light truck escort vehicle driver as a sedentary occupation, they're probably using Job Browser Pro. And if they are using Job Browser Pro, it's very vulnerable to a sedentary occupational analysis. So let's just look at it. The OcuCollect calculator says there's less than 34,112 jobs that are sedentary SVP2. And so that assumes 99% of all light truck drivers are in fact full-time. Slightly less than 70% are SVP1 or 2. Oh, I have SVP2. Let me put both. Should be the same. 77.1. Ooh. I didn't know driving was so simple. But less than 5%. So we're up to 37,951 jobs. So what is the definition of sedentary work? In terms of sitting, what is the definition? What does your state agency doctor typically say? Does the state agency doctor say there's no limitation in sitting or sitting 6 hours? I'm seeing a few heads nod. It's 6 hours. It doesn't take much of a physical impairment to not be able to sit for 8 hours a day or not be able to stand or walk for 8 hours a day. It doesn't take much at all. Just and if a person has any kind of back impairment, the worst thing that they can do is sit, because sitting exerts greater load on the axial spine than does standing or walking.
Yeah, well, we know that, right? We know that. But that's what the RFC is going to be, and we're not doctors. And so we try to argue
the RFC from the judge?
No, if there's already an RFC assessment. Let's hypothetically, let's say we're at an RFC assessment. This person can only stand and walk 2 hours a day, right? And you get a vocational expert that says, if you say, you can usually back them up.
Laura, let me stop you right there. What did the judge say about sitting?
Probably 6.
Okay.
So I get not to interrupt. I get where Laura's going with this, because I've had this happen too. Judge gives sedentary work. They argue, they say escort vehicle driver. I go in and go, well, how many hours of sitting did you consider? They say, well, 6. And then I argue basically common sense, what you're arguing. You can't do this if you're really going to sit for 6 hours. What's the 2 hours of standing and walking encompass? Right. And then the judge goes in, okay, I'll just change it to 8 hours of sitting. That's what you get when you start playing games, not playing games, but that's what you get when you start with that down that road. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen with medium work too, where I'll get medium work and then I'll go, well, would you assume the sitting requirement or the standing and walking requirements? I assumed it was 6. What is this person? What are they doing for the 2 hours when they're standing on their feet? Hold on, counsel. I want you to assume that they can stand and walk 8 hours. They don't have any limitation. So I've gotten that too.
Okay.
The DDS doctor said 6 hours of sitting about 6 in an 8-hour day. The consultative examiner said 6. Your client testified to less than 6. Okay. What is the evidentiary basis for a judge to say they can sit 8? None. So the question is not, take your comment. I've had this conversation with Matt many times. Take your common sense and throw it the fuck away, because nobody cares what we think about the world of work. We're talking about data. We're not talking about our gestalt of what we think, because I don't give a rip what you think. I give a rip what the data says. And what does the data say? All right, so we're in light truck drivers. The question is not name me the duties that they can do while they're sitting. Is in a typical day, how often do light truck drivers stand and walk while performing their job duties? Not what job duties they are. How much? How much sitting do they do? Okay, we have a sitting report, and we actually want percent of the day. And this is light truck drivers. Uh, 2023. Do escort vehicle drivers sit half the day? If they don't sit half the day, what are they doing? They're sitting down 80% of the day. And the problem for light truck drivers is that it's such a broad group, but we're talking about sedentary work. So we're talking about the most sitting in the day, not the least amount of sitting in the day. And we go to the basic ORS report, because this is the data that you should be submitting with your argument, light truck drivers. And so this is easily printed to a PDF. All right, so sitting is required 80, 80, 70. But what we're really concerned about is not the sitting. We're concerned first about sedentary. So it's not 5%. It's less than 5%. And 5% is not less than 5%. 5% is 5%. So let's look at what is actually out there. We've established with a 95% certainty that 60 plus 20 is 80. 9 plus 4 is 13. We're at 93, 93.5. And then light work is 3.2%. So we're at 98.7% of the jobs. And if the vocational expert says, I'm using the 5%, it's like, well, we've accounted for 98.7% of the jobs. Why would you use more than 1.3% of the jobs? The statistical answer, which the vocational expert is not qualified to pontificate on, is that the margin of error, they're counting the margin of error at every level that's actually measured to any degree of statistical certainty and adding them together and saying, our best guess is that it's less than 5%, and we're not giving you a certain number. We're not giving you a standard error measure, but it's less than 5%. And so the only real answer that a vocational expert could actually give you is to say that 64 plus 29 plus 3 is in fact 95. That would be 96.7. So the very heavy and the sedentary combined are less than 5% combined. Not each one of them, but combined. And so the real step in terms of escort vehicle driver is to go to SkillTran. And we go to documentation. And articles. And we go to escort vehicle driver, because I don't care what your opinion is, but I do care what Jeff Truthen says about escort vehicle drivers. Okay. And so as Jeff Truthen says that that escort vehicle drivers are required to use the brakes. And here it is, an escort vehicle driver is at least light work. Additionally, the use of the brake pedal in an emergency will rapidly exceed 20 pounds of foot pressure. If foot pressure exceeds 20 pounds, what's the exertional level?
0.
No,
Medium.
median.
I would argue, well, how much, the amount of, I don't think that's right. Foot pressure has to do with how much you weigh as a person.
No,
So 110-pound person that puts all their weight on the foot pedal is putting 110 pounds of pressure.
you stand up when you hit the brakes?
If you have to, and that's my point.
Right. But that's not,
Right.
Laura,
What makes
you're-
you think you can
Laura,
compare that to
Laura,
medium work?
Laura,
The lifting 50.
Laura, the DOT, the ORS, and every other data source that classifies exertion classifies foot pressure as part of the exertional standpoint. And I agree with you that being on your feet puts more pressure on your lower extremities and back than does pushing a brake pedal. But that's not the way the statistics are expressed. The statistics are expressed that if you need to rapidly push down 25 pounds of pressure on a brake pedal and you do it once a day or once a month, you're engaged in medium exertion. And
So all driving jobs are medium.
Say that again?
So all driving jobs are medium.
Probably.
And the data for that is this?
Right there. It's right there in front of you. Yes.
Okay.
There's also,
I'm sorry, where did you say that it says?
hold on. Sedentary work is classified as 10 pounds of force occasionally or a negligible amount of force frequently. The ORS defines negligible amount of force. The DOT does not define negligible amount of force. Negligible amount of force is 1 pound. 1 pound. And so if you have, but regardless of whether or not it's 1 pound or 5 pounds, if it's any force at all, how often while a person is driving do they have their hands at 10 and 2?
Not very often.
Really?
All the time by law.
There's at least one hand, Monica?
I'm just thinking about how I drive, and I'm not at 10 and 2 all the time.
Do you have one hand at 10 or one hand at 6? So
Yeah.
at least one hand exerting some force all the
Mhm.
time. My car won't let me take my hands off the wheel without beeping because it's an X and not an S that looks at my eyes. It wants hand pressure. And so I have to actually put some force on the steering wheel constantly during the day, during the time that I'm driving, at least one hand constantly. And that's not sedentary work.
I have a question.
Yeah.
All right. So let's say the VE says, okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but the DOT says it's sedentary, and they threw out our favorite based on my experience and education. I really don't have a reason to deviate from that.
Did you tell me before that that SkillTrend Job Browser Pro or Oasis was your data source for estimating 37,000 jobs?
What if I say I relied on that as far as job data?
Okay. And so when SkillTrend contradicts Job Browser Pro and Oasis by saying the job is at least light, how is it that you determine that SkillTrend can be trusted for job numbers, but not trusted for the amount of exertion?
All right. So let's say I say, I'm relying on all these different sources and relying on my best judgment as to which sources give me the best data as far as which specific categories of information that I find reasonable.
So in your experience, do escort vehicle drivers get paid for being on their feet, or do they get paid to sit in the car and drive?
Of course, they're seated at least most of the time.
Okay, is most of the time more than 6 hours in an 8-hour day?
I would say that based on the DOT's classification of 6 hours, and it could also be additionally beyond 6 hours that would classify it as sedentary. I would say that this job requires between 6 to 8 hours of sitting.
So if a person was actually limited to standing and walking, I'm gonna strike that. If this person was actually limited to 6 hours of sitting in an 8-hour day, could they perform the work of an escort vehicle driver on a sustained basis? If they could never exceed 6 hours in an 8-hour day of sitting?
Based on my education and experience, I believe that an escort vehicle driver could sit 6 hours and then the other 2 hours communicate with other individuals in terms of routes, wait for various other parts of the job that requires me to wait. I can get out, stretch, and carry out my job duties in the seated position in 6 hours.
Every day, every single day in and day out, week after week, month after month, never exceeding 6 hours. Is that your testimony?
I would say that there are some days that they would have to sit. All right, let me think about this.
I'm boxing him in.
Well,
When
this
is
is
this-
to the point where the judge interrupts and says he's answered your question, counsel, move on.
No. You know,
Yeah.
I have never had that happen. I've had that happen to me maybe once or twice. But
Happens all the time.
every fucking day, and I don't get this response. I don't get that.
Because you know how to ask the questions correctly.
No,
That's why.
because you're Lawrence fucking Rolfing.
No,
Okay,
because
let's
I think it's because I do not know trial advocacy. Like, I really do not know how to ask questions the right way.
Right.
And as long as you're asking questions, the judges usually let you go, like, they'll let you go longer. But Larry, what I wanted to say that Young didn't get to is what I get sometimes is actually, so the job description says, like, when you do a little bit more research on this job, whatever, that they get out sometimes and direct traffic. Right? That's part of what these people have to do. They deal with the public. And so this is why there's no data on this. This is why of any other job that I can think of for a long time, this job jumps out at me. Like, my gut, my instinct, everything says, because I know I couldn't do this job. Maybe it's because I'm a woman and I don't feel like as confident driving a truck or whatever. But when you have these oversized vehicles, right, and they're driving underneath freeways, right, and they're going through intersections, these things cause millions and millions of dollars in damage. And also, there's 2 escort vehicle drivers, and they require different skill set. One is a front driver and one is a rear driver. So I want to ask the vocational expert that is there a rear one and a front one, and do they have different duties?
Okay. Laura, you brought up the DOT, and I want to get back to that, but I want to answer Young's question about the DOT first, because he said that the vocational expert testified that they sit for 6 hours and stand and walk for 2. And I pulled up the DOT Appendix C, and I asked them, read the definition of sedentary work in the DOT to me. Do you have Appendix C in front of you? No, I don't. Let me read it to you as an officer of the court. Exerting up to 10 pounds occasionally, activity or condition exists for 1/3 of the time, and or negligible amount of force frequently. Frequently, activity condition exists 1/3 to 2/3 of the time to lift, carry, push, pull, or otherwise move objects, including the human body. Sedentary work involves sitting most of the time, but may involve walking or standing for brief periods of time. Jobs are sedentary if walking and standing are required only occasionally and other sedentary criteria are met. And occasionally is defined in that first parenthetical up to 1/3 of the time. So where in the definition of sedentary is this idea that 6 hours is enough for most sedentary jobs? Where in the definition of light work is the idea that they can stand and walk for 6 hours in an 8-hour day? Where in the definition of medium work is there a requirement to stand and walk for 6 hours in an 8-hour day? The answer is it's not there. The agency made that up. They made it up because light work and medium work generally require more than 6 hours of standing and walking in an 8-hour day. It's not there. It's not in the definition. I had a vocational expert waste 5 minutes looking through his papers trying to figure out where he got it from. I said, "What are you prepared to answer the question?" He says, "I'm looking for the data." I said, "It's not there. It's in Social Security ruling 8310, which means it's not in the DOT and it's not in the regulation." And so when an ALJ says, "Well, I'll just increase it to 8," it's like, be my guest. Be my guest, judge, because that is clear error, because that's not what the doctor said. No doctor said that. Are you going to make a decision based on bias, or are you going to make a decision based on the evidence in front of you? The evidence says 6 hours, and the vocational expert has conceded that this job requires more than 6 hours. This whole 8310 6-hour thing is a lie. And you need to throw it, you need to vomit out the Kool-Aid that you drank, because it's poison. It is absolute poison. It's not there. I've got the DOT in front of you right here. Sedentary, light, medium. Find the word 6 in there. Find the number 6 in there. It's not there. It is not there.
Let me ask you a question. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but so when the DOT says, or no, when the regs say they take administrative notice of the DOT, and the DOT says, there are the 7 criteria that determines what the exertional category of a job is. Standing and walking being 2 of the 7, right? So how do we get there? How does the DOT get there to say that if standing and walking is a criteria, then how are you going to classify it as light, medium, and so forth without a delineation of the number of hours?
If a person has no standing or walking in an 8-hour day, other than incidental standing and walking, it's sedentary. If all the other criteria are met, sedentary is a definition of exclusion. You have to exclude light exertion. So a job that's sitting all day long, but constantly moving 5 pounds or even a pound, is light work. But the primary difference between light and sedentary work is the amount of standing and walking. But how does the agency get there? 8310 got there. And 8310 did not go through notice and comment. 8310 did not go through notice and comment. And so it isn't law. There is no case that says that 8310 is law. What they will say is that we defer to agency promulgations unless they're plainly erroneous. And I tested this in Terry v. Saul, and the court said, we don't want to get into whether or not it's plainly erroneous. We just want to get into whether or not we believe that the vocational expert and the ALJ both silently assumed 6 hours combined of standing and walking. And they did. But the case that jumps off of Terry is what, Russell? Which case is that?
Revels? Or Conway v. O'Malley.
Conway, the Ninth Circuit said that the 6 hours is a soft presumption. And if you ask the vocational expert, can they do this job if they're limited to 6 hours of sitting or standing and walking, and they say no, then you've rebutted the presumption that the vocational expert assumed 6 hours when they identified the occupation in the first place. The first case that I won on 6 hours of sitting was Randazzo. Randazzo was a Ninth Circuit remand on DOT conflict that went back in front of the judge with the spiky hair in San Bernardino, Silva. And I asked the vocational expert, because he identified addresser and some other BS jobs. I said, does this person have to sit for more than 6 hours, an 8-hour day to perform the job? And he agreed that they do. I said, then it's out. And Silva said to me, you know that we've gotten new instructions on how to examine vocational experts. And we've been told to omit the 6 hours of sitting or 6 hours of standing and walking to give more latitude to the vocational experts to identify jobs. I said, I'm aware of that. But we're going to always ask. If you don't ask, it's forfeit. It's not waived, it's forfeit. And forfeiture is a much taller burden to overcome. Much taller burden to overcome. It's almost impossible to overcome forfeiture as part of the waiver doctrine. Laura said that escort vehicle drivers are engaged in traffic control. The DOT here doesn't say that. So whatever Laura was talking about is a different occupation, or it's a
Okay.
composite occupation.
Okay.
And it's generally performed as a
Precedes
composite.
escort and maintains special difference between pilot vehicle. So what's a pilot vehicle?
Um,
I thought a pilot vehicle and the escort driver were just different names for the same thing.
no, the pilot vehicle is the vehicle that has the wide load or the dangerous load.
Okay. Okay, proceed and maintains to provide warning to other motorists and to clear traffic locations.
With their vehicle. With their vehicle. There's nothing in here about getting out and walking around. There is things about driving your vehicle.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you ask the vocational expert might say that. Right?
Then you're identifying. So are those duties included in the DOT narrative? If the answer is no, then they've identified a different occupation.
Oh, well, what if she says, yeah, it is. It says clear traffic at locations. And in my experience, that's what they do.
That they're clearing, and is that an unskilled job function?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, you can learn how to do that in a week.
Really?
I mean, I don't think it is, but especially the not hitting the
Well,
bridge.
Yeah, most of the responsible vocational experts, in light of what Job Browser Pro, what SkillTran has to say, have abandoned escort vehicle driver. They've abandoned it. But let's really get serious about escort vehicle driver. Because you're going to get something like this for simple SRTs, because it is reasoning level 2. Jeff says it's misclassified, but let's just stick with, so your source for job numbers is Job Browser Pro. Yes, great. And do you agree that SkillTran, Job Browser Pro, or Oasis identifies around 38,000 jobs for this DOT code? Yes, I do. Great. All right. Do you agree that with the numbers classifications that for the individual industries? Well, that's what I use. All right. The last line is TE 1100 for self-employed workers. Is being self-employed simple and repetitive? Is self-employment a job? Because if being a lawyer is hard, intellectually hard, imagine how hard it is to herd cats, because that's my job. Being self-employed is a completely different ballgame.
What about a day worker?
A day worker is not self-employed. A day worker is just hanging out there, and a day worker is not full-time employment. Because if I'm a day worker, I don't know if I'm working today or not. And I don't know if I'm working 8 hours today or not. A day worker is clearly not SGA as defined in 96.8P. It's also very rigorous work.